the President's requirement for those deported on or after January 20, 2017. So think about that.
Oh.
His plan fails to address the biggest problem we have on the southwest border, but it also gives the current secretary, who I know you all are big fans of, gives him the discretion to reopen all the deportation cases that occurred while Donald Trump was president. So there is no love for America represented in his day one plan. Now, they were saying before the executive order was, hey, the Senate put a bipartisan bill together. The Republicans worked with the Democrats, and it's a bipartisan effort, and Donald Trump called all the House members and called all the Republicans in the Senate and killed the bill. Anybody know who the majority leader in the Senate is right now? It's Chuck Schumer. Do you know who decides in the Senate? This guy knows. Do you know who decides in the Senate what bills get on the floor? Chuck Schumer. That is the power of being the majority leader or the Speaker in the House. You decide what gets on the floor and what gets voted on. So if Chuck Schumer wanted that thing to get on the floor, even if the Republicans weren't going to vote for it, even if Donald Trump was advocating against it, he is not the majority leader in the Senate. Chuck Schumer could have put that bill on the floor, but he didn't. He did it because it's a disaster. Now, it did go after some of the structural changes required in our current asylum law. That's a good thing. It provided resources. And if you want to put more boots on the ground, if you want to put more sensors out, you want to put more lights and roads on the border, I'm all for it. Some of that was in the bill. But it also had some real flaws in it. It contemplated that you had to have more than 3,500 people coming across the border every 24 hours before the secretary could act to shut down the border. 2,500 is the executive order. The Senate bill was 5,000. And it was discretion between 3,750, 75% of 5,000. Discretion, if there was 3,750 coming every night, the secretary could act with the permission of the White House. And so, like, we're going to wait until almost 5,000 people are coming across the border before we do anything? That's not a good plan. Here's the worst part of the Senate bill. For purposes of paragraph 3, the secretary ... He has the authority to close the border under the numeric trigger. During the first calendar year after the effective date for more than 270 calendar days. So by legislation, the current president can only close the border during the calendar year 270 days in the first year. How many days a year?
65.
What happens the rest of the year? Yeah, he has no authority to close the border. During the second calendar year, you could see a scenario where if they had passed this thing in March when it was up for grabs, then there would be a new president in the second calendar year of implementation. He can only close the border for 225 days. In the third iteration during the calendar year, they can only close the border 180 days, less than half a year. So what are we doing? Like, the Senate bill had a lot of flaws in it. Those are the ones I think that kill it for me. So when they tell you they're fixing it, and then the current EO contemplates a trigger at 2,500. Now, being an operator on the ground in each of the sectors, I ran a sector. I was the chief of Rio Grande Valley for a couple of years. I was the chief in Swanton sector on the northern border for a couple of years. Waiting for someone to call you and say, hey, we've reached the threshold of 2,500 per day in a 7-day period. Now you can close the border. You can expel people back to Mexico. The Washington Examiner, a friend of ours, was also a reporter, Anna Giaratelli. She did a story in the Washington Examiner yesterday. She got a bootleg copy of the instructions for the agents that are in the field. It's online. You can see it on X in her account. There are 6 countries that qualify for the new power that is exercised in the executive order. 6 countries. There are well over 150 countries represented inside of the current flow. And so it's not helped, it's not made a difference. And even the mainstream media is reporting there has been no change on the southwest border since the signing of the executive order.